Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Maroon 5, titled 5. You know what, if I'm being honest, I'm amazed that this album exists at all. Because if you had told me a decade ago that one of the few big pop rock acts still managing to chart singles rather highly on the Billboard Hot 100 right now would be Maroon 5, I probably would have laughed in your face, just being honest. And that's not even saying they were originally a bad band. I mean, their brand of funk was aggressively stiff and white and nowhere close to the Police in terms of goodness, but they could write some still impressively catchy songs, I'll admit that. I might not have been the biggest fan of Adam Levine's vocal delivery, as he occasionally came across as obnoxious and smarmy more than he could really back up, but his voice was defiantly unique and he did have some versatility as a performer, particularly when he brought some real sincerity to his work. And as many of Maroon 5's relationship songs screamed of douchebaggery and framing that was nowhere near self-aware enough to pull that off, it occasionally brought some real swagger and even some real sincerity to anchor some of their better material. In other words, Maroon 5, they were never a band I would consider all that special, but they had good songs. I can kind of respect them. But as the 2000s became the 2010s, it became clear that Maroon 5 was becoming less of a rock band in any capacity and more of a vehicle for Adam Levine's solo career, one that was supported by an arsenal of professional songwriters. In other words, they sold out, which honestly would not have been a problem for a pop act. I'm not judging them for that for here, if the music had stayed strong, or at least maintained some vestige of individuality. And that really didn't happen, culminating in an album overexposed in 2012, a record that has only gotten worse every time I have listened to it. It's an album that somehow stripped away even more of Maroon 5's characteristic unique sound with somehow even worse lyrics. It's a sour, bitter, unpleasant listen, with the exception of the gentle and heartfelt piano ballad Sad, which I really liked, and it left me with little hope that the band would ever recover any sort of artistic integrity, especially considering that album sold as well as it did. So honestly, why would they have any reason to try if they kept doing as well as they did commercially? And you know what? Even with the return of keyboardist Jesse Carmichael from hiatus, I did not have high hopes whatsoever for their newest album, 5, and I was not looking forward to covering this album in any capacity. But then again, given I had no expectations here, this means that Maroon 5 had nowhere to go but up, at least in my point of view, so I figured what the hell, and I gave this album a chance. How'd it go? Ugh. I'm honestly tempted to just say this record is just as bad as Overexposed and just as deserving of no attention whatsoever, but honestly, I do think V is a little bit better, or at least more consistent. But note that when I say better, I mean it's less obnoxiously grating and offensive. There are less elements that make it really worth getting angry about. But that's almost worse from a reviewer's perspective, because instead of a bad album that I can get good and riled up about, I've got a record that's firmly squatting in mediocre territory, that's more aggressively bland than outright awful. Now, some people have called this album a Maroon 5 record of filler, and I would only slightly disagree with this, because this is an Adam Levine album of filler. Because Maroon 5 on this record are barely more than a backing studio act at this point. Because let's make this clear, you can't say that Maroon 5 are a rock band anymore, especially not on this album. Don't let the reggae-inspired guitars floating midway to the back of the mix on Maps fool you here. This is a modern pop record, plain and simple, with all the hallmarks of that sound that are both good and bad. Now, the percussion, it's got some texture and it's got some variety, and it's placed right at the front of the mix, in front of any sort of melody, which are usually confined to the thin, inert guitar tones and are left at the very back of the mix. Lovely. Now, to this album's credit, the vocal production has at least some depth to it, and it's done a lot to make Adam Levine's voice stand out. Obviously, he's the front man. And the better songs on this record, they do emphasize some decent synth lines that recall a lot of mid to 80s synth pop. That reminds me of post-Invisible Touch Genesis and Phil Collins, both artists I like. Or maybe even the very lightest of Depeche Mode's material, which, as I said, not a bad thing. And of course, there are flourishes of early 80s disco on songs like Sugar or Feelings. But the riffs here often feel very shrill and lodged right at the top of the mix, so they have little to no depth throughout it. In fact, if we're looking for a problem all around instrumentally, it's in the instrumental tonal choice, namely because the synths and the guitars on this record feel so flaccid and devoid of driving energy or texture, with the crescendos never building to any sort of real punch. Take Maps, for example. Prime example of this sort of pre-chorus build of trying to explode into its breezy, catchy through line, but it contains no real impact for me. And part of this is an issue with tempo. With very few exceptions, this record rarely develops a sort of tightness or speed to really ever give these songs much of a pulse, with Unkiss Me probably being the most egregious example, even though I mostly like that song. And with the poor tonal choices and lack of melodic focus in the mix, songs really start running together and start coming across as a little bit interchangeable, at least for me. Now granted, Adam Levine doesn't exactly help matters. Now I've said in the past that I'm not really a huge fan of his voice, but I will agree that in certain ranges he can show a lot of very real sincerity that makes his love songs at least come across as earnest, and I can respect that. And to this album's credit, there are a fair few more songs that fall along that line than on Overexposed, and even moments where the production does showcase some texture and flavor in Adam Levine's voice, like on the album's best song, It Was Always You. But it's that song that also highlights why the addition of pitch correction and vocal effects can be so damn irritating with Adam Levine's voice in terms of the mix balance as a whole. To put it as simply as I possibly can, Adam Levine has a very strident voice that you will always hear within the mix at a very specific range, but that range then which you'll hear his voice is very narrow. Whenever the production tries to gently expand that range, give his voice a little bit more room to breathe, give it some texture, it can work. But whenever the production tries to force it, to conform it, or narrow that range using pitch correction, it comes across as forced and really unbalanced. That's why the pitch correction on Animals and New Love, or the multi-tracking on Sugar, or whatever the hell was happening on Feelings, sounds so painfully grating to me. Adam Levine, he's got the pipes to mostly hit those notes, but all the added effects and production makes it sound painfully processed and forced. He doesn't need it here. But as I've mentioned in the past, my biggest issues with Maroon 5 have always been lyrical. And you know, there's a slight improvement here, at least in terms of subject matter. Now, I mean, the biggest issue with Overexposed was obnoxiousness, and thankfully Maroon 5 has tamped back with 5 in favor of songwriting that's a little bit more straightforward, mostly courtesy to over 25 additional professional contributing songwriters, which led to a lot of Maroon 5's rougher edges and personality getting sanded off. On the one hand, that's not exactly bad, as at least songs like Maps or the breakup tracks Unkiss Me are a lot more benign and inoffensive as they really could have been. And that's not saying that Maroon 5 can't leap into the offensive territory with songs like Feelings, your standard stealing other guy's girlfriend song, which is just obnoxious, or In Your Pocket, a mean-spirited and contemptible song demanding that a girl show her phone and prove to him that she's not cheating with every manipulative line in the book. It's just a sour, unpleasant song with it all framed to show Adam Levine clearly did nothing wrong here. But you know what? Okay, in comparison to previous albums, songs this gratuitously douchey, they tend to be minimalized. There's not as many of them on this album. But here's my big issue with the songwriting. With the big influx of new songwriters, any scrap of unique personality that Maroon 5 could have brought to that songwriting feels scraped away entirely. In fact, the songwriting only starts to stand out when it starts showing real problems. Like on Animals, where the girl plainly does not want to be in the relationship with Adam Levine, and yet he's set on hunting her down with a rather uncomfortable level of intensity. Or take New Love, where Adam Levine seems to be wanting that connection with that girl in question. He seems to be over the moon over it, and yet leads off his course asking the girl to forgive him right away for inevitably screwing up, because that's the message that every woman wants to hear at the start of a potential relationship. That dude's sure a keeper, alright. But you know what, really? The bigger issue here is that none of these songs, even by pop standards, bring many new lyrical ideas or wordplay to the table that we haven't seen a dozen times or more before. And I'm not saying that it's inherently bad. I like Unkiss Me, and It Was Always You probably being the best song on the record. But at the same time, that last song is a song that bites pretty hard from the template of The Search Is Over by Survivor, a song that is really so much more melodic and interesting than anything Maroon 5 has released over the past 2 albums. Yeah, I'm including this one in the mix. Look, in the end, I can't recommend this album, especially if you like the earlier work from like Songs About Jane and you were put off by the pop sound of Overexposed. At this point, I gotta be honest, Maroon 5 is barely a band, but only a solo backing vehicle for Adam Levine to put out new singles that feel more and more tired with every new release and iteration. Now, this might not be Maroon 5's worst or offensive album in instrumentation and lyrics, but honestly, it's their most soulless. It's a 4 out of 10 for me, no recommendation, and maybe, just maybe, Adam Levine might feel that bolt of inspiration come back and might push him towards rock again. But I'm seeing a trend here with this and Overexposed, and honestly, I don't think that's gonna happen. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.